All right, why don't we start? Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today in this webinar, highly anticipated webinar about tract housing and portfolio certification. Today,
your project, you assess the project in the Edge software, and this is where you register in the regular process, meaning you hit the registration button. The Edge auditor audits that one sample, and then the sample achieves certification, final Edge certification. These steps number 4, 5, and 6 is the regular process everybody knows, and these refer that you certify your sample. After you certify your sample, then you have what is called the non-sample rollouts. The non-sample rollout is the one building, the number of buildings that will achieve certification, final Edge certification, as a reference from the sample that you certified in step number 6. You have to wait for the certifier to confirm to you. This is going to come in the form of an email saying you are ready to certify your sample. Now you are ready to deploy the non-sample rollout. That means you need to get an email. You will create the non-sample with the save as document options in the software. That is copying the one sub-project that already achieved certification, and you will only update 2 things: the design tab and the window to word ratio. The rest, you don't have to do anything else, the rest of the measures. And then you need to notify the certifier through an email that you created all of the sub-projects, and that's it. And this is something really important. The non-sample rollouts is not going to get audited by the Edge auditor. Is going to go straight to review to the Edge certifiers. That means you skip that one step. You don't use an Edge auditor for the non-sample rollout certification. So that is, as a summary, the certifier certifies your sample, and then you wait it to be notified by the certifier. You can create your non-sample rollouts, and then once you do it, you notify the certifier. We had created those extra supporting those extra sub projects. Please review them, and then the certifier will review those new sub projects, and they will grant certification if everything is in order. The certifier will use an option that they can see on their special account they have, which is certify as a reference, and now everything gets certified. So I'm going to review the process again because this is something new. The process is quite similar. It's almost exactly the same. However, like I said before, it does have a few differences. So in the beginning, you, meaning the one who is trying to pursue Edge for the project, you inform the certifier a list saying, I want to register in the program. So you send this email, and then you cluster your list so you can identify the different groups, and everything is going to make sense in a little bit. We're going to explain how to do the clusters and everything. The auditor selects the sample of your cluster, and then you register your sample. The auditor reviews and recommends your sample to achieve certification to the certifier, and the certifier certifies your sample. And then comes the extra project, the new process, which is the non-sample rollout. You wait to get the confirmation from the certifier saying you can now use the Safe As with document options in the software, so you can create the non-sample rollouts, the sub-projects that will be used for the non-sample rollout. The certifier will review your non-sample rollout sub-projects, and the certifier will issue the certificate for the non-sample rollout. Remember, step number 4, 5, and 6 is the regular certification process for the sample. The rest is the non-sample rollout. So I'm going to review in more detail steps number 2 and number 3. This is the Annex 5. The step number 2 would be how to create a cluster. This is the most important for the portfolio approach, is how to create your cluster. And then how you review that one cluster in the sample as an auditor. So this is what you're seeing on the screen is a print screen of the Annex 5 from Part 1 Edge User Guide. Sorry. And that explains how you need to create a sample. It's something really simple. It looks like multiple steps. However, it is not really that difficult and everything makes sense. So this is the way we did it for a project. So let's say you have this number of buildings. The number one would be the auditing period. You can group everything that is ready for occupancy with at most 12 months. That means if only these buildings, these 12 buildings, are going to be ready within that 12 months period, then that is your clusters. The other ones that extend beyond that period, you cannot include those in this cluster. So for this, we cannot cluster those other buildings that just disappear within the first one cluster that we just identified, which is this number of buildings. The step number 2 would be the similar edge category. That means it's either you can group everything that is existing building, and you can group everything existing buildings as defined by edge, which is 5 or more years since the building or the asset was built. And everything that is not like that is not considered as a reuse of existing materials. So out of those 12 buildings, let's say half of them are buildings that were created, that were built more than 5 years ago. And then the other ones were built 2 years ago. In this step, you realize, okay, I don't have one cluster, I have 2 different clusters, because in cluster number 1, I'm going to use reuse of existing materials. In the cluster number 2, I can't do that. And then would be the subtypology. Everything that you cluster together has to be the same project type and the same subtypology. Let's say all of my buildings are commercial buildings. However, the first 3 are supermarkets. The other 3 are small food retails, and the remaining ones are department store. In this step, I realize I don't have 2 clusters, I do have 3. The next step would be the same jurisdiction. That means basically in Latin America, that means all of your buildings are within the same country. The reason because of this is because everything has to apply the same construction code. In Mexico, what reigns the construction code is a Mexico City construction code in most of the country. So as long as it is within the same country, you're covered. Everything, all of these 3 clusters are in the same country. So my clusters remain the same. I still have 3 clusters. And then the next would be climatic zones. Let's say it depends on the location of your building or your assets. Let's say the first cluster is located in Guadalajara, which is ASREC climatic zone 2A. The other, let's say they are in Guadalajara and Mexico City. One is ASREC climatic zones 2A, the other one is 3A. Per the user guide, you can group everything together in the same cluster if they are located in climatic zones 0 to 3A. That's why I can remain one building. I can have one building in Mexico City and the other 2 in Guadalajara. They are in different climatic zones, but they are within the same frame that I defined. And then the other one is, let's say, Pachuca. Pachuca, it's not 3A, it's 4B. So that means this confirms these can be together. This second cluster can be together as well. This last one is a different climatic zones. Everything is in order. I don't need to modify my clusters. And then the building fabric, that means the building is built similarly. It doesn't have to be 100% exactly the same. They have to have similar conditions. Let's say this is the cluster number 1 is a standalone building. The cluster number 2 is also a standalone building. The cluster number 3, this is interior. And this one building that is interior is going to have a different fabric because number one, is not going to be exposed to the exterior. There are not going to be that much thermal exchange in between the exterior and the interior of the building. So this behaves, even though it could be the same area, the same interior design, this is going to behave differently. And then the rest are going to be stand-alone buildings on cluster number 3. Because of this, I have to drop this one building. I could either group it in a different cluster, or I can pursue the regular certification process, not through the portfolio approach. In this case, cluster 3 got 1 unit less. The next step would be to identify your systems. Let's say, I'm just going to discuss this about the HVAC, but you have to identify all of the system of your building. Let's say these 3 are using mini splits. The cluster number 2 is also using mini splits. And then the third cluster, let's say this one building is using a centralized HVAC system. The other buildings within the third cluster are mini splits. Because there is a huge difference in between the systems, I have to drop this one. And if I want to certify this one, it has to be through a different cluster or the regular certification process, not through the portfolio approach. At this moment, I realized my cluster 3, again, got 1 unit less. And then the measures. The measures, you have to use the same measures. So let's say all of these are using the same measures for construction, for energy, water, and materials. But let's say this one have the same measure except for an extra measure. The rule says that you have to use exactly the same measures for all of your cluster. So in this case, I still got 1 unit less. What started as 18 different buildings, I just realized through going through Annex 5 that out of those 18 buildings, I can certify through the portfolio approach by 3 clusters, only for 9 buildings. So I'm going to review again the process. Remember, you have your list, those 18 buildings that I just presented. Remember, you cluster your list. At this moment, when you cluster your list, that's how we ended up with the 18 buildings, all the way down to 3 clusters, 3 building per cluster. This is step number 2. I'm just going to refer to the cluster number 1 to make it more simple. The auditor selects your sample. That means if you are the consultant or the developer, you need to work together with your auditor saying, this is a cluster. We need to identify which one building of that one cluster will go through the regular certification process. So that is our sample. Let's say this is your sample, building number 1. You register your sample. The auditor audits your sample. And then the certifier certifies your sample. This is the moment when you achieve a certification for your sample. And then what happens with the other 2 buildings? You inform those as a non-sample rollout. You wait for the certifier to tell you, go ahead and create the non-sample subprojects with the Save As with Documents option. Analyze those and achieve certification for those 2 buildings. How you create the cluster, especially how you identify how many buildings are going to be your sample, because the sample is not always going to be one single building. The formula for the sample is 10% of the cluster size. So that says, that basically means if your cluster is 10 units or less, you have 10 units or 10 buildings or less, you need 1 sample. You need 1 building to be your sample. So 10 units or less than 10 units is always going to have 1 building to be sampled. Let's say if you have more than 10 units, you will have at least 2 buildings to be your sample. That means you can have a cluster of 100 buildings. Yes, your sample is going to be 10 buildings. And this is something really important because this is how everybody would like to move forward with. Depending on how bigger your cluster is how fast you can certify buildings with the portfolio approach. However, the bigger the less homogeneous your cluster, meaning your buildings are different among them, it is best to have them as clone buildings. However, that is not going to be the case because the market doesn't behave that way. So I'm sorry. So the bigger the cluster, the more the complexity. However, the faster you will achieve certification. So the more experience you have with Edge, because you will understand how Edge works and how the software behaves when you analyze a project in the Edge software, the larger the cluster you can afford. You do want to have big cluster with so many buildings. However, you should have experience before getting involved with big clusters. And that's what we did. Tried to we tried to go for big clusters. However, after reviewing the process and working together with IFC and the certify, we realized even though we wanted to have big clusters, we needed to start with something humble. So if you think about it, this is the way the portfolio approach is kind of designed to. If you go to the USA, you are gonna see these buildings. They're the Taco Bell and Pizza Hut. They did something together, and in multiple cities, you find this one building, which is almost a copy and paste of the same building with the two restaurants in one single building, and they pretty much look exactly the same. These two are in California. This is in New Mexico, and you see how similar they look. If you think about it, the portfolio approach is designing a way to certify buildings like this. The same, all Holiday Inn Express buildings in Mexico, they look kind of the same. I got the chance to review some projects like some 15 years ago for Holiday Inn. And you see the drawings, and then you're like, this one building that is located in one state is exactly the same one, and most of the system are exactly the same as the same hotel branch in a different city. Or take Walmart, for example. It is the same building. It could have a different shape, but it's going to be, the construction guidelines they follow, their own construction guidelines, they always specify the same materials, the same everything. So the portfolio, if you think about it, was designed to attempt buildings like this, to address buildings like this. However, that is not the case. Is there any question or anything, Adel, or are we good?
Thanks, David. Just wanted to clarify because a lot of questions on the chat about housing and tract housing. So people are really looking forward to the next section of your talk. But yeah, I wanted just to clarify. So the portfolio is intended for commercial buildings, and we don't expect them to be identical, but we expect them to be to have the same characteristics in terms of performance. So similar specifications for U values, similar specifications for minimum efficiencies of HVAC, and that's where portfolio certification shines. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that. We can move on with your case study, David. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Adel. Thank you, everyone. So this is the case study. So the portfolio was 63 bank branches located in the two climatic zone groups, meaning we have buildings from 2A all the way up to 4B. They were located in 13 different states of Mexico, and we had new construction, existing buildings that were for longer than 5 years located in place. We had existing buildings that were less than 5 years. And we had standalone buildings. We had neighboring buildings, meaning a building that is next to another one, well, a bank branch that was next to another building. And inside a mall, meaning we don't have no exterior wall that is exposed to the environment. So this is the portfolio that we wanted to address with the portfolio approach. So the cluster, we identified we needed a cluster. However, after working with all of the projects, all the documents that we got from the client and everything, we realized we were only able to submit 6 out of the 8 clusters. So this is cluster number 1. What you see on top is going to be the sample, the one building. Please notice we don't have any cluster. The largest one has only 7 buildings. Um, so we only needed one sample, and we wanted to avoid putting everything together to have more than one building for the sample. So at the end, after reviewing everything, we realized we had 6 clusters that we were able to submit for the cluster approach, and this was last November. This is something that we do. This is our daily practice. We always create in Freelotus this spreadsheet. And I mean, of course, you won't be able to read everything because it's really small. However, I'm going to explain to you. So everything that is on the left hand is the list of everything that is requested on the design tab and every single measure, what is reported by the Edge project team. And this helps the Edge auditor to identify better and to save a lot of time when the Edge auditor reviews the support documentation. So this is the one spreadsheet that we always have 100% of the time in all of our projects. And this column is building number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, and 6. There is another one that is not on the print screen. So this is the one that we started with. We review all the as-built conditions, and we did it as a normal process. And we did it because to have everything in this way helps you identify which is the worst case scenario. The sample should correspond to the worst case scenario. So I'm gonna focus on the reflecting roof measure where you have to report the SRI and the isolation of room, which is this one's right here. This is the project. So for the SRI, we had for building number 1, 65. The second one was 71. And then the third one was 70. And then you have all of the other, right? And then for the insulation of room, insulation of roof, building number 1 had 1.32. The other one was 1. The other one was 1.15. That means building number 1 remains with the worst case conditions out of the group, out of the cluster. So what is it that we did? The Edge project team recreated all of the 7 different projects just to see if all of them comply with the Edge standard. And once the project team identified the worst case conditions, they replicated the worst case conditions in all of the sub-projects. Meaning, if your SRI was 65 in here and 71, now you reported 65 in all of the sub-projects. This is what they did so they could realize whether all of the buildings in the cluster were going to be able to achieve the Edge standard when reporting the worst case conditions. So this is the lessons learned. Remember, in the cluster, your one building that is going to be your sample always has to be the one that reports the worst case condition. So you would expect something like this saying, okay, so for reflective roof, the COP for the cooling system, and then the materials and all of the measures, you expect to have something like this to easily identify that one building is always going to have the worst case conditions. So you can easily identify this one building is going to be your sample. That is never going to be the case. The market doesn't behave that way. The building don't behave that way. What happens in reality is that the worst case condition for the SRI were on building number 1, the COP. The worst case conditions were on building number 3, the same with the bottom floor construction, then same for the roof construction. So you are rarely, almost never going to have one building collecting all of the worst case conditions. When we realized about this, after reviewing that many bank branches, we realized that the final approach, and we reached out to IFC to confirm if this was okay, was we're going to create a hybrid a hybrid of collecting all of the worst case conditions for all of the measures and create your sample out of collecting all of those worst case conditions. And you especially, this is why I emphasize you need to have experience with this, because at the beginning we thought, okay, the worst case condition is always going to be the one that has the most glazing. That wasn't the case. Um, So we at the end we collected all of the worst case condition and report what we call a hybrid sample, collecting all of the worst case conditions, and then in the non-sample rollouts we reported the same condition as a hybrid, as this one sample. You need the auditor and to discuss this with the auditor, so you are sure that you identify exactly the worst case condition for your building or buildings. Lesson learned number 2, the documentation. And this is why at the beginning I uh, said, try to have your green construction policies. With existing buildings, all of our portfolio approach, and also for the tract housing, which we will review in a few slides, all of those buildings were existing buildings. Remember, the portfolio approach and the tract housing is designed for the post-construction stage. The preliminary certification can be a regular process. You don't need a portfolio approach. You don't need a tract housing approach. The preliminary is just the usual one. The portfolio and the tract housing is for the post-construction stage. So it is really common to don't have supporting documentation. You don't have the purchase receipts. You might not have photographs of exposed materials, etc. So what is it that we did? Because I mean, we couldn't demolish a wall just to have a picture of the actual material, right? So we ended up with, if you have construction policies that are published, well, not published. If you do have construction policies, we can use that as a reference to identify what type of material you build your building with. And we had it for the band branch. So in this case, with this construction, this is the actual construction policy. It has multiple pages. I'm just showing you the one where they are informing the type of materials. In this case, we are referring to the exterior walls, which is the B type, the external wall type B. And the type B is right here. It was a hollow concrete block with 15 centimeters, with 150 millimeters. So by using the green construction, by using the construction policy they have for the client, we were able to inform the materials, in which cases we didn't have any supporting documentation like purchase receipts. Remember, this is for your sample. The non-sample. Then this is what we did. Remember, in order to identify your cluster, this is the image that I showed where we identified we had 6 clusters that we were able to submit for certification. In order to identify your cluster, you don't have to, but you definitely want to analyze all of the sub-projects, all of the buildings, and replicate to identify the worst case conditions, so you can identify which one is going to be your sample. That means you do have to create all of the sub-projects. That it took a little bit longer than usual, but it was so helpful. So since we had to analyze all of the sub-projects and all of the buildings, we ended up creating all of the sub-projects. When we certify the sample, that's when the instructions of now it is the right moment so you can create the extra sub-project, but we had previously created those in the past. This is the email that we got from the certifier saying, you certify your sample, you are now ready to use the Save As option, so you can clone your sample and modify the design tab and update energy efficient measure number 1, which is window to wall ratio. And that is going to be your non-sample rollout. That's the one that is not going to be audited by the auditor, is going to be reviewed by the edge certifier. What happened with this? When we created, well, I mean, the Edge project team created the sub-projects, all of them were merged. All of them had the auditor assigned since the very beginning, and we didn't realize about that. So that created an issue because the certify as a reference option was not available for the Edge certifier because the previously created projects were merged with the sample. It's going to be easier to understand with this. You want to create all of the sub-projects so you identify which is the worst case scenario. You know, it's not only creating the sub-projects on the Edge app, but also creating that big spreadsheet that helps you to identify which is the worst case conditions for every single measure. You want to do it because you want to avoid selecting a wrong worst case scenario, which would mean you will have a wrong sample. But this is the way you want to do it. Let's say if this was your cluster, you want to have them as independent sub-projects. Please notice how the project number is different for each of the sub-project, even the project name, because they are independent sub-projects. They are not merged together. This is what you want to do. You want to recreate, you want to create all of the sub-projects. You want to do your spreadsheet. This so you can identify the worst case conditions and select together with the auditor the correct sample, the correct worst case conditions. So you identify your sample. But you want to do it through independence of projects. If you don't do this, and that is because file number 1, 2, 3, and 4, these are going to become your sample and then your non-sample rollouts. And why you want to do it by having independent sub-projects that are not merged together, you want to avoid this. And this is because this created the issue that we faced like 2 to 3 days before we had the deadline, meaning we were this close not to achieve certification just because we had all of the projects merged. Why was it an issue? Because when you have them merged, meaning all of your 4 different projects are part of the same project number, it has to go through the regular audit. It doesn't allow the team to send it directly to the certifier. It has to go through the Edge auditor. That added an extra step that we were not supposed to have. I hope that was clear. Other lessons learned, in your non-sample rollouts, you want to include the self-assessment from your sample. Why is this? Because remember, the Edge reviewer is going to open your non-sample rollout and compare that to what you previously reported on your sample. So the Edge reviewer needs to open the 2 sub-projects, download the supporting documentation, and check it. If you can help the reviewer, the Edge reviewer on the certifier side, by including the self-assessment, everything is that the reviewer needs to check is going to be on one sub-project. So the Edge reviewer is going to have the non-sample rollout open, and that non-sample rollout is going to include the self-assessment from your sample. And in that one sub-project, the reviewer can check everything. It doesn't have, there is no need to be opening some other sub-projects. You want to identify the cluster issues that you could have, any, and this did happen to us. By the time we created, when the Edge project team created the different sub-projects, they realized, hey, when we moved something, when we updated something in the non-sample rollout, we thought everything was going to comply. It didn't in some of the cases. So you want to identify any possible issue that you could face on your cluster by creating every single sub-project. Never overlook, remember, in the portfolio approach, the only thing that you update in the non-sample rollout is the design tab and the window to wall ratio, energy efficiency measure number one. Just because it passed on the sample, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will pass in the non-sample rollout. We had a couple of surprises. One cluster was supposed to be 9 units. At the end, it was only 7 because when the project team updated the design tab, the project was not complying anymore. Even though it had a better window to wall ratio, it was because it was located in a different climatic zone. And don't be afraid. I mean, if in your cluster you miss one building, you could either destroy the cluster and start again, which is totally not recommended, but you do have that option. Or simply forget about the one building that didn't comply with the H standard in the cluster, certify the rest, and that one building that didn't comply, put it in a different cluster, or pursue the regular H certification with the entire process. Now, how to identify if this is for you? Number one, is your group clones? Like all of your buildings are the same? Are they homogeneous? Or are they different? It is preferable and desirable to have them all exactly the same. However, it's going to be quite difficult that you have exactly the same one building built in multiple states in your country. So don't be afraid to go for something like this. They can be different. Do you have enough time? We spent 5.5 months working with the client. By the time, I mean, we were working for last year, the entire last year. However, when we realized we could go for the cluster, it was the last 5.5 months of the year. Is there any question, Adal?
No. Just a time check, and we should move soon to the
Okay,
tract housing calculations. Thank you, David.
perfect. So we did save time. We did save in travel allowance because by visiting 6 units, we certified 23. Uh, this was not going to be possible, and in certified 23 units within the timeline that we had was not going to be possible if it was a regular process. That's why the portfolio approach was really helpful. So to finalize, and the tract housing is going to make a lot of reference for the portfolio. So that's how I can move faster. So in your sample, remember, this is for post-construction. In your sample, you go through the regular process, as usual process. You provide the photographs and drawings, the construction policy in case you have it, the purchase receipt, photographs, you do the water flow test. In portfolio approach, you only update the design tab and energy and efficiency measures. Notice all of the rest are certified as a reference from the sample. That means no photographs, no purchase receipts, no water flow test. What was recorded for the water flow test for the sample is going to be repeated for the non-sample rollout. This is where you save time. This is why you can visit less units. I mean, you can do the remote audit, but I mean, this is how you save time. So this is what you want to do and what you don't want to do. So you do want to have previous experience with Edge. You want to inform and work with your Edge certified and auditors since the very beginning to inform them this is the list, this is the number of buildings, let's review everything together so we create a proper and good clusters or clusters. Elaborate on the process to the client. This is not a magical solution. This is something that can help you, but that doesn't mean if you enroll in a portfolio approach, everything is going to be certified just like that. I mean, do not create false expectation on the client. Get familiar with the registration process so you don't do the same mistake that we did, but putting everything together. So we had extra steps that were not supposed to happen. Start early. In our case, I do not recommend if this is going to be your first portfolio approach, do not go later than Q3. That means you want to start in July analyzing everything. The faster, the better. And you want to do small clusters, especially since this is your first one, portfolio approach. Don't do it if this is the first project that you have ever faced. Don't do it. Start with a regular process and then understand how it works so you can move with clusters. Do not be afraid of the process. It was challenging at the beginning, but it was really helpful at the end. Never assume the worst case scenario because you could have surprises that happen to us. Never assume that just because the worst case that you identify comply with the standard, that doesn't necessarily mean the non-sample rollout will comply with the standard as well. And avoid big and large clusters, more than 10 units, especially if this is your first one. Is this for you? If you're a developer, yes. If you have previous experience with Edge, if you have assets with minor or no changes, meaning they're almost clones, or you have so many buildings, this is for you. If you're an Edge champion, you probably have multiple assets. This is really going to help you. If you're a consultant and an Edge auditor, if you're a premier and service premier and or preferred provider, this is also for you. This is going to help your clients. So now the tract housing workflow. The tract housing is pretty much the same as the cluster, except for a couple of things. Number one, this is for residential. Number two, there is an extra step. In this case, currently, it informs that you could cluster your homes. You don't want to do that, and I'm going to explain why. So basically, it is the same as the portfolio approach, meaning you certify one, your sample, and then all of the other homes achieve final edge certification by referring to the sample. Again, we also have an annex informing this is annex 1 of grouping logic for residential units, and this is what you need to follow, which is exactly the same thing except for the home unit typology. You cannot put together in a cluster something that is low income with higher income, or residential with multifamily with homes, like apartments with homes. So it is the same thing. It is exactly one. You need your own representative, meaning the client, to sign the agreement. So you have to involve the owner. You need to use the annex 1 from the addendum. That means you can cluster. I would totally recommend you to avoid clustering. And then the rest is exactly the same process. You go through your regular process for your sample, and then you certify your non-sample rollout, making a reference to your sample. And the only thing that is also different from the portfolio approach in the tract housing is that you do need to do the water flow test. In the portfolio, you didn't have to. In the homes, in the residential project, in the tract housing, you do have to do the water flow test. So I'm going to show to you, this is what you could do, but this is definitely something that you want to avoid. Remember, it was really helpful when Edge created the multiple typologies, meaning 3 different homes. You could group them together using multiple typologies by using one subproject. However, the issue that's going to happen, well, not the issue, the situation that's going to happen is which one is going to be your worst case scenario, because the 3 homes are different. They could be the same subtypology. They could be apartments. However, they could be 100 square meters versus 50 square meters. They behave totally different. So if it was complicated to identify the worst case scenario, it's even going to be even more complicated. Sorry, to identify the worst case scenario when having different type of homes that are informing the software using one single subproject with the multiple typologies option. Remember, the idea of the tract housing is also to help you by submitting multiple times with simplified documentation, support documentation for the post-construction stage. Let's say you are, do your sample in March, and then April, September, and October, you can submit the rest as the non-sample rollout with simplified supporting documentation and the water flow test. However, remember the issue that I explained with sample to identify the worst case condition. If it is complicated in portfolio, it's even more complicated to do it with multiple typologies. Having that said, avoid at all costs using multiple typologies when applying the tract housing for residential projects. This is what we did. In the same case, with 3 different units, we had the units, each of the unit had an independent project. We certified the sample, one sample per unit type, and then the rest came as needed. Meaning in March, you could do your sample, and then in June, you can do the non-sample rollout for these 3 sub-projects, September for these 3, October only these 2 because this one was not ready. You could go for that one in November. If you think about it, it is exactly the same as the portfolio, except for this is for residential. The tract housing is really similar to the portfolio approach. Why was it done this way? Number one, so social housing, we say it's not built. Social housing is manufactured. And I say this because a home or multiple homes can be ready to be occupied in 1 week time. It's really dynamic. It moves really fast. You don't want to wait to have your certificate in December so you can apply green mortgage in April, let's say. Remember, you go for the regular certification for your sample. The orange one represents the sample. It is really easier to certify in the regular process with your sample when you have a smaller group instead of 1,000 units, only a couple of them. And then in February, you only update the design tab, the window to wall ratio measure, and the water flow test. And then the rest is exactly the same as February. You certify as a reference from your sample. This is a non-sample rollout. This is your sample, the regular one. All of the rest is going to be the non-sample rollout. And we are introducing a term which is the dynamic measure. And I'm actually going to explain that on the case study. Is there any comment, Adal?
Thanks, David. I think here a good question, because for housing and certification, you have project multiplier and you have ways to really model big projects. But the difference here is the timing component. I think that's the one takeaway that you have to have in mind when you're thinking about tract housing, is that once you have your sample project certified and approved, then you can release in batches of any number. You could do it every day. You could do it every 3 months. Probably that's more realistic. Every 3 months, you can release the batches of the housing units that have been confirmed, that are practically completed, basically ready for occupation as per the EDGE criteria. Thank you, David. You can continue with the case study.
Thank you, Adal. So this is the case study. It was more than 2,500 units that were rushed into the last quarter of 2025. The decision to go for the cluster, for the tract housing, it was made in October. These 2,500 units were located in 6 states, 8 different cities, in 10 different developments. And we had 8 different home and apartment types. Tract housing is designed to be used for homes. You can use it with apartments in case the apartment is the same in the building. That's the way we did it, and that is what is requested currently by EDGE. The challenges that we had was to obtain the supporting documentation. You know, the photographs, so, the purchase receipts, everything is already on one department of the client, and it was really difficult to get that information out of the department. That is most of the time the case. It doesn't matter where you are. So lesson learned number one, the naming. The name of the sub-project is quite important. This list right here is 120. This is the portfolio number 4 that we got for this client. This portfolio 4 had already certified 120 sub-projects. If you check my account, I have not only 120, I have 704 different sub-projects that I had audited and reviewed. If somebody expects the H auditor to identify that one sample out of 704 or 120 is going to be quite difficult. And you're going to waste a lot of time just by trying to locate the correct sub-project that is your sample. The project, the sub-project name is really important, and this can help you identify the correct sub-project that you as an H auditor need to be working with, or if you as a consultant need to report to the client. So this is the idea that we came up with. The number one would be your client. So, you have all of your different clients. So you can identify all of the sub-projects that belong to the same client by including the client names in the sub-project name. This is the sub-project name. This is the sub-project name, okay? And then a T if this is a tract housing, or an R if it is just a regular process. The year and month from when the sub-project was created. And this is also going to help you to identify. The tract housing approach allows you to certify the non-sample rollout within 12 consecutive months after you certify your sample. That means in this case, that's March 2025. I have until April 2026 to submit the non-sample rollout as many times as the project or the client requires. And then you have your development name, your unit type name, and if this is your sample, or NSRO, which means non-sample rollout, and then the number. That means for this client, we are on the tract housing. We are submitting this on March 2025. The project name, the development name is Bilbao. We are certifying the A1 prototype, and this is your sample. And then the non-sample rollout came on May, non-sample rollout number 1. And then a second non-sample rollout came on July. This is the non-sample rollout number 2. So this is really going to help you. The name of the sub-project will provide more clarity when you're working with multiple sub-projects in your H account. The lesson number 2, be ready for last-minute changes. Even though H requires to use exactly the same measures, something can happen. So let's say in January, and we're going to refer to the water efficiency. This is your sample. The water heater efficiency was 80%. And then you have all of the rest exactly the same, except for August. We realize for some reason, and this is more common than you would expect, you have a different water heater. Probably the supply of the previous one, they ran out of stock. Probably they found a better pricing. Probably they changed the people who provide the water heater. Something happened, and this is more common that you would probably think. So by the book, per the guidelines, you should exclude it from the non-sample rollout. However, we were like, we don't have time. I mean, we have to move forward for this. In this case, we confirm this with IFC, and we say, hey, I'm going to be conservative and either allow me to report, even though I do have a better water heater that's going to provide me with more savings and probably is going to make me achieve the H advanced level. I don't want to exclude this from the portfolio, from the tract housing approach, because we just don't have that much time. Either allow me to report something that is not the case, allow me to report something that is less efficient, so I can comply with sample, or this is something that we identified together with IFC. create a dynamic measure, even though the rules says they have to be exactly the same things, exactly the same measures. Allow me to modify just that one. This has to be reviewed on a case by case basis, because if you turn every single measure into something that is dynamic, and even though the guidance requests to have something similar, if you start reporting different cases, then the tract housing approach is not your approach. You could have a couple of dynamic measures, but not too many. And this has to be reviewed together with IFC on a case by case basis. And then you go for the same September, October, nothing happened. And then in November, you introduce photovoltaic panels. It's like, again, per the guidance, you should exclude that one from the tract housing approach, or evaluate uh, in November, when is the deadline with some certifiers, that if you don't comply with certain date, if you don't submit it with your final recommendation as an auditor, or submit it for the reviewer on the tract housing, if you don't commit to that one date, you won't be able to certify the units in November. I'm sorry. It's either you forget about the photovoltaic panels, you don't report them, or you apply for that dynamic measure, or you say, I do have time, I'm just gonna go through the regular process because I do have time. Your time available will advise you faster whether you can do this or not. That means just be ready for changes. Good practices. Again, for the non-sample rollout, always include the self-assessment from the sample that was previously certified on the regular process. Never overlook what happens with it. I saw a question over there asking, what if you change the orientation of the building? That's why you need to reinform, to provide the support documentation for the design tab and window to wall ratio. That's where you identify the number of units and the orientation. Never overlook the design tab and the window to wall ratio. Just because the sample complies, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will have all of your non-sample rollout in the tract housing comply with the H standard. And again, remember, if everything fails, if something happens, and if you fail compliance, it doesn't mean you miss the chance to certify the home unit. You can go back to the regular process and certify it. And we did it. That happened to us for a couple of projects. It is the same in the sample. You go for the everything as usual. In the non-sample rollouts, remember, you certify as a reference. No photographs, no purchase receipts. Uh, I have a typo right here. You do require the water flow test. Is this for you? I mean, this is the do's and don'ts. If you have previous experience with Edge, if you're working together with your certifier, if you elaborate on the process to the client, and if you start early, especially for the tract housing, I would recommend go for Q1. If you have 100 units, certify. If you have at least one unit built, go for that one. Let that one be your sample. And then the rest, you could have up to 1,000 units in your non-sample rollout. And you have 12 months to certify your non-sample rollout. So if you have one unit, at least one unit in Q1, go for that one. And then certify the rest as you require or as construction develops. You don't want to use a tract housing if this is your first project, or if you're using multiple typologies. Never use multiple typologies with the tract housing. And never assume that the construction process will remain the same. It happened with one of our clients who said, I have built the same rooftop slab with the same material for more than 20 years. But it did happen that in October, September, something like that, they changed the material just because the material was not available, the one material that they were using in the past. So even though you're building the same home unit, never assume that everything will remain the same. It's really easy to have changes. So is this for you? If you are facing challenges in collecting supporting documentation, we had delays of up to 6 months just by retrieving the purchase receipts and the photographs. Even though it's something that looks like really simple, it's really complicated sometimes when you have multiple departments within your client, within the developer. If you're facing challenges in collecting supporting documentation, this is for you. If you have a well-structured construction process with no spec changes, that's the desirable. Remember, it doesn't mean everything has to be like that. We did have changes. It's really dynamic what happens in the construction process. If your construction schedule is constantly changing, we have one client that said, we have 100 units, and every other week they say, I needed to add that extra more. Every other 2 weeks after that, they say, you know what, forget about those. We're going to include a different prototype. That happens every 3 weeks with one client that we have. So if you have something like that, the tract housing is for you. Especially if you require final certification for green mortgages, which is the case for Mexico. If you're in a champion, you want to use a tract housing. If you are a premier or preferred provider, this is something that you want to do for your clients. If you, I don't know if there is any question that we can address, Adal, we still have some 10 minutes.
Thanks, David. So the main comment is that it is not possible to cover all this in 90 minutes. There's a lot of new information. It's very, I mean, it's great. It's great, all the takeaways and the lessons learned from this session. So a few questions over here. Overall, we've been trying to reply as many as we can. So yeah, I think one part in general that the participants are asking is on the cluster, if you can add or if you can remove buildings from your cluster. And I'll let you reply on this one. How was your experience on adding and removing buildings from the cluster during the process?
When we realize all the things that can be installed and specified differently, we realized adding buildings to the cluster was not the case. It was actually subtracting buildings from the cluster. Let's say you have clones. There are a couple of commercial buildings, well, not a couple. There are commercial buildings that could be clones no matter what type of city and climate zone you are. So let's say if you have clones and you say, I want to go for 10 buildings, your sample is going to be 1. And then you realize 3 months after that, you know what? I'm going to build more than that. So instead of having 10 buildings in the cluster, now I want to add 15. You can do that. However, remember, the sample has to be at 10% of the cluster. So if you add building, the sample needs to be 2 buildings in case you want to go from 10 to 15 buildings. So you can add buildings in the cluster for the portfolio approach for commercial buildings. However, make sure to have enough time so you can add the sample. And remember, the sample is the regular certification process with the site visit and everything.
Excellent, thank you. And we have questions about when is the final certification for a home unit. So we have a clarified definition on the user guides that any certificate, any final certificate needs to be for a building that it's in practical completion or which is on the definition on ready to move in. In practical terms, this means that all the measures that have been claimed can be assessed, and there is no future promises as to a measure that is claimed but is not there yet. So yes, it is ready to move in. Yes, doesn't have to be. I mean, probably with the furniture and all the details, but practical completion has to do with the measures, that all the measures that are being claimed can be fully there's an evidence that they exist. That's very important, and that's a requirement that we have as an EDGE green building certification. So David, I'm gonna give you just a couple of minutes to give some of additional takeaways on timings and advice. You can rant now because you've been testing the first version of Tract Housing, yeah, you gave also a lot of feedback on the documentation and so on. Before you start, I want to say that Tract Housing came from many discussions that we have with consultants and developers that needed that final certificate provided as quickly as possible. And this is because of financing reason. So yes, you want to finance your project for the construction, that's fine, but then also you want to then add an extra benefit, which is that your future homeowners also have access to green mortgages. And for that, different institutions required the finance certificate, mostly for legal reasons. So that's the story behind Tract Housing. We're quite excited and we want to further refine it. So I want to just provide a bit more on your experience with certification of these projects for housing last year.
Well, it was challenging at the beginning. However, after you understand how it works, and to be honest, it's not really that difficult. It's just that it is a different process to what we were already used to. We had certified more than 50,000 units of homes. So the process is slightly different. However, we realize, I mean, we don't have too much time. We have to accomplish what the client requires, and we need to find alternative solutions. So the client was happy, and we are using the portfolio approach, not only for the same client, but a couple more clients with multiple portfolios. I mean, this is definitely the way to go, especially with large projects. It doesn't have to be necessarily big ones. It could also be small. The timeline is different for you, and you simplify your documentation. So small or big, it is really helpful. I don't know if you want to mention something about the QR, Adal.
Yes,
Janice?
Thank you very much. And Janice and David, thank you very much for your time. So please, for those that are still here, we would appreciate pretty much your feedback on the session. We hope you have learned a lot and that you can consider this option for future projects. So as David said, there is some learning curve here, but once you get the gist of what we're trying to do here, then hopefully it becomes a very good tool. So please provide us with your feedback. We will try to have more sessions like this to share experiences with everybody. And thank you to David because yeah, you prepared very nice slides for everyone. And yeah, we will be sharing the recording to everyone who has been registered for this event.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity for sharing what we did. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.